The wind moaned across the frozen plain, combing the brittle grass beneath a violet sky. Firelight flickered inside a ring of stones, licking upward like a heartbeat against the dark. A group huddled near it, their breath silver in the cold, their eyes reflecting the embers, like coals wet with memory. Beyond them stretched a wilderness untouched, wild and watching. Somewhere, far across the ridgelines and rivers carved in ice, another fire glowed, a different kind of people gathering beneath the same stars. They looked like us, but something deeper was different. Two branches, alike yet separate, walking parallel paths through a world on the edge, both breathing, both surviving, but not both destined to endure. Why did one vanish into the dark, while the other claimed the dawn? The land was brutal and beautiful, carved by glaciers and crowned with silence. Ice giants still roamed the edges of the known world, and storms rolled in without mercy. In the cradle of this frozen expanse, two kinds of humans held on, each sculpted by the land and by necessity. One group, stockier and fireborn, moved through the cold with practiced surety, their muscle dense, their senses honed. These were the Neanderthals, shaped by tens of thousands of winters. They knew the bones of the forest and the whispers of the wind. The other group, more slender, with darker eyes flickering curious light, came from the south, bringing with them tools of finer edge, thoughts built layer by layer, like the flint they struck. They were newcomers, but they carried something invisible that radiated from within, an adaptability, a rhythm not bound to one climate or one kind of earth. For thousands of years, their trails never crossed. The Neanderthals, children of the cold, stayed where the frost kept its grip longest, dwelling in the shadowed valleys of Europe, where mammoths trampled the tundra and cave lions prowled the dusk. Their tools were steady and honed, passed through generations like ritual, each notch carrying memory. They revered the land as a hunter does, a quiet, kin-like trust formed through repetition and blood. Meanwhile, the newcomers, Homo sapiens, spread like a restless wind. From the dry savannas, through green river mouths, and into the vast cold lands they had not known, they followed game and dreams alike. Theirs was a migration of ingenuity, not just instinct. They painted with ochre, sang to stone gods, and birthed symbols where before there had only been survival. Yet, as weather shifted and hunger pushed deeper, the invisible distance between the two species began to shrink. Not yet a meeting, but already a reckoning stirred beneath the snow. Seasons turned like tides, slow but certain, and the chill in the air grew teeth. Herds thinned. Forests shifted. Strange storms rose from the sea, and the patterns of life began to unravel. In a sloping ravine where frost pooled like water, a single footprint dried in the crystallized mud, narrower, longer than those the Neanderthals left. Then another, and another. Eventually, briefly, two trails became one. The first encounters were not war, nor peace. They were glances across a clearing, the sound of tools in the distance, uneaten bones left near a cave mouth. Tension rippled beneath the surface, but so did wonder. What do you do when the echo in the woods answers back in a different voice? What stirs in the soul when you meet something that looks like a shadow of yourself or your future? In the quiet of that long Ice Age twilight, the two humankinds did not yet clash. They listened, they watched, and somewhere, in the hush, before conflict or communion, History held its breath. In the basin of ancient rivers, now long vanished, signs of mingling began to appear. A jawbone buried with care, displaying the curve of one lineage, but the dental pattern of another. Tools of distinct hands found fused in ash pits, their edges shaped by overlapping priorities. These were not the tokens of conquest, not yet. They were whispers of choice, of curiosity, of something, perhaps recognition, emerging from the void. The Neanderthals, who had sung to the rhythm of glaciers, felt the winds change, not just in the wild above, but in the presence of these lithe wanderers from the south. Their ways were different, neither better nor worse, but they were many, and with each passing season, the balance tilted. Homo sapiens brought more than tools. They brought stories etched in pigment, camps shared across bloodlines, alliances swayed by warmth around common fires. And somewhere in the marrow of this fragile cohabitation, something sacred passed between them. Not enemy, not fully kin, but something unnamed. A bridge still forming over a chasm that could never be fully crossed. But the Ice Age was no forgiving host. The earth cracked with hunger. Snow fell in silence, but covered graves without names. The fragile bridge that had formed flickered like flame in the wind. In fossilized dunes and soot-blackened shelters, we find signs of what followed. Times when the fires died too quickly, when children's bones lay beside broken tools, when meat was scarce enough to turn kin into competition. Tensions rose in the space between species, not as wars, but as slow suffocation. Fewer shelters stood between them, less land to wander. The predators of the world did not vanish, but now the most dangerous were cousins who remembered different songs. Still, not every crossing led to ruin. In pockets of the world, DNA bears silent testimony that some Neanderthal and Homo sapien blood mixed in trembling embrace. But for one species, these moments were not enough. As the glaciers withdrew and valleys warmed, one path dimmed into shadow, until only footsteps in stone remembered where it had led. The world chose not war, but forgetting. And in forgetting, a kind of elegy. Farther north, where twilight lingered longer and the sun's warmth struggled to breach the clouds, a final stand was unfolding. The Neanderthals, now only a scattering of tribes, clung to mountains and coastlines where the winds bit hardest and the Homo sapiens came latest. They returned to their caves, carved into limestone cliffs, etched not with colors, but with the soot of old fires and the scars of claw and stone. Isolation became both shield and sentence. Here, the last of their kind lived not in defeat, but in stubborn perseverance. They still hunted, still taught their sons to track deer by starlight, still buried their dead in silence. But the world no longer bent to their rhythm. It pulsed now to a quicker beat, one of rapid innovation and shifting alliances. A world that had once whispered secrets to them in the howl of wolves was now speaking in a new language, one they did not have time enough to learn. Their extinction was not abrupt, but gradual, like breath fading on a winter's pain. In the stone silence of their last winter, perhaps they sensed it, the end, not as a catastrophe, but as a passing tide retreating forever from the shore. And yet, even as their presence slipped beneath the soil, something of them lingered, in the spiral depths of our genes, in fragments of skulls warmed by sun after tens of thousands of winters, in the way we dream firelit stories and stare too long at stars. Their shadow walks with us. The world did not remember their names, but it remembers their trace, an ache in the silence, a breath behind the wind. The Homo sapiens endured, but not alone, carrying pieces of what came before. In blood, yes, but in manner, too. They stepped forward into the unfolding world. The Neanderthals vanished, but their echo did not die. It became the haunting drum under our skin, a rhythm older than memory. Two paths once split in the frost, but in the end, they touched. Their shadows faded with the ice, but their story endures in every breath that followed. But before the world turned its final page on their coexistence, something remarkable unfolded in the ice-laced valleys of what we now call Eurasia. A series of campfires, barely feet apart, bore witness to nights where voices from both branches rose together in laughter or negotiation. In one long collapsed cave, brushstrokes of pigment trace overlapping symbols, one set angular and rigid, the other fluid, circling like wind. Shell beads carved with varying techniques, strung together in patterns neither group had used alone, suggest that for a fleeting sliver of deep time, these two species did more than survive beside each other. They created. In this crucible of frozen earth and shared hardship, they taught and took, adapted and transformed. These moments, though few, shimmer like frost in morning light, fragile and shining with what might have been. And if silence followed, it was not empty. It held echoes of a song once sung by two kinds of humans, harmonizing briefly before becoming one. The question lingers, unspoken yet heavy in the breath of time. What if the lines hadn't blurred? What if the Neanderthal flame had not flickered out, but burned parallel to ours, changing the human story not with exclusion, but with coevolution? In the quietest corners of the earth, archaeologists still brush away ash and dust in search of that answer, finding traces that rewind us to that fragile dawn. Not fossils alone, but questions buried in layers of ice and bone. What language did they dream in, those final Neanderthals? Which stars did they count before sleep descended? We cannot know, but we feel them. When the cold wind bites and our instincts flare, when solitude tugs at some ancient part of us, we feel them not as void, but as presence, suspended in the long silence before morning. Their story is not just about extinction. It is about nearness, about how close we came to becoming something else, someone else, and how fragile the thread was that tethered our kind to survival, while another unraveled, silently, into the frost. Across the scarred bones of the land, the traces become more ghost than print. Sites where both species left stone blades side by side grow fewer and farther apart, signs of integration fading into whispers. At Saint-Césaire, in what would one day be France, a skeleton was found. A Neanderthal, interred with tools typically fashioned by Homo sapiens. Was it a gift? A grave shared by kin? The meaning is unclear, but the implication resonates. The borders between them did not vanish cleanly, but dissolved like memory beneath melting ice. By the time the forests returned and grasses swung gently in the breeze once tamed by snow, the Neanderthals were gone. Their disappearance was not recorded in violence, but in silence. No final battle cries, no shrines, just absence, profound and echoing. And yet it is in that very void that we reach through time, sensing something unfinished, a chapter closed too softly. One species walked forward, carrying more than its own memory, and the other, though lost in form, found immortality hidden within the ones who remained, shaping who we became, and reminding us that survival was never simple fate, but a fragile dance in the cold, between the known and the vanished, in granite gorges scoured by winds that never ceased. The remnants of a moment shimmer unseen. They speak through bone and soot, through the shimmer of obsidian napped by practiced hands now long gone. The Neanderthals' legacy was not only left in what they made, but in what they inspired. In Homo sapiens who watched, who learned, and who eventually layered their own myths atop the fading footprints of another kind. And although Neanderthal voices no longer rise in firelight, they pulse in the pulse of every storm-born story, in every quiet glance toward the dark, and in the echo we feel when we ask, with awe and ache, what if they had remained? In that question lies not sorrow alone, but reverence. For in that distant wilderness once lit by two kinds of flame, the line between separate species was drawn thin as breath, and for a time, two human hearts beat beneath different bones, chasing the same dawn. The frost took one, but the memory never left. In every step we take through snow or silence, their shadow walks beside us still, in crevices where fire once glowed against cave walls, and mammoth hide draped across stone thresholds. Time has settled into dust-thick silence. But within that stillness, there lingers a breath of what we almost became. The near branching of the human tree, the almost double dawn. We carry its weight deep in our marrow. As snow falls over forgotten valleys, as archaeologists kneel with hearts tuned to the past's faint rhythms, the story finds its voice again. Not in conquest, not in dominance, but in the poignant ache of almost. When Neanderthal hands met sapiens' eyes across collapsing time, a choice was made, not entirely to join, nor fully to divide. The split never completed. It hesitated, hung suspended in the fog of ancient mornings. And because of that hesitation, part of them breathes still, not in legend, but in legacy. As roots curling around ancestral stone, their presence lives not as ghost, but as echo. And if we close our eyes and listen to the wind threading through empty canyons, we might still hear it, the heartbeat of what might have been, pulsing quietly, endlessly, just beyond the frost, in a hollow beneath crag-clawed pines. A scattering of tool shards rests unnoticed beneath centuries of moss. Some are Neanderthal in form, thick and direct, chipped by instinct and repetition. Others bear the delicate angles favored by Homo sapiens, flecked with signs of experimentation and symbolic drift. Together they lie, indistinguishable now in their quiet sleep, artifacts of lives once lived in parallel, then in proximity, now in memory. The soil here holds no preference, no verdict. It wraps the past in silence, binding what once diverged into layered time. Above, the wind curls through branches like breath held between two thoughts. Somewhere in that breath lives the tension of what nearly happened, the birth of two enduring humanities, each lighting their own fire against the dark. But nature chose another course, one marked not by dominance, but by vanishing, by the quiet victory of adaptation over tradition. And so, while they did not walk forward beside us, they walk within. Every dawn we follow, every star we interpret, is seen through eyes that carry their shadow. It is neither triumph nor tragedy. It is the ache of almost, immortal in its longing. And in that ache, the story rests, whole at last. Two species met, nearly parted, then folded into one enduring flame not far from those ancestral pine hollows, where snow still falls undisturbed and rivers ribbon quietly through ravines no longer marked by footprints. The bones of both species sleep side by side beneath layers of time. What separates them now, genetically, culturally, temporally, amounts to less than the distance of a breath or the silence between pulse and heartbeat. The branches on the human tree did not break clean, but bent toward each other in the weight of survival. The Neanderthal no longer walks the earth, but their instincts curl inside our sinews. Their endurance etches itself into our resilience. It was never just about disappearance. It was about transformation, absorption, the quiet gravity of coexistence. And so, as the last ember of their world dims into history, we stand in the strange light that was born from both flames, not alone, not unchanged, but bearing the inheritance of a meeting that shifted the path of everything to come. In the endless hush that follows snowfall, in the blood-warm thrum of memory, the Neanderthals do not vanish. They wait within us, in the rhythm of breath, the hunger for flame, and the ever-haunting ache to remember what we almost were. And so it ends, not with a cataclysm, but with the hush of snow falling on stone. In that silence resides the strange victory of one path and the eternal trace of the other. Two kinds of humans once looked upon the same stars, warmed their hands by separate flames, and for a time wove their destinies together across the frozen tapestry of the earth. They stood at the brink of divergence, poised to become something more or something apart. But the world, indifferent and immense, chose a quieter merging, a line not split, but folded. The Neanderthals are gone, yet we are not only their successors, we are, in part, their continuation. The story they began did not vanish in the ice. It moved forward, quietly, in our bones, our endurance, our dreams. In every place where wind traces forgotten riverbeds and firelight dances on cave walls, their memory lingers, not as a shadow, but as a light that once was, and part of what shaped all that would be. Further along the bone trails of time, in regions where the snow no longer falls and forests have reclaimed the ice-laden earth, the remnants of that ancient duality quietly persist, not in stone or fire, but in the imperceptible terrain of memory woven into human instinct. The urge to seek shelter before the sky darkens, the stillness we hold before the first crack of thunder, the reverence for silence in vast, wild spaces, all echo an ancestry we only partially inherited. The bifurcation of paths that once nearly made us two species, instead left a braided thread, a shared echo of survival wrapped in different forms of thought, fear, and creation. We may never know the last Neanderthal's name, nor the words they used to comfort their children as night fell across the ice. But somewhere in the rhythm of our stories, in the hush before sleep, their presence hums. They did not vanish into extinction. They were folded into us, like snow melt into river, like shadow into flame. And when we wonder what it means to be human, we carry the answer, not alone, but as a chorus, ancient and unbroken, resonating softly from a fire still burning in the long night of time. Below the soot-veined ceilings of ancient shelters, a different kind of silence lingers, one not of absence, but of reverence. Here, beside crumbling hearthstones and pictographs faded beneath centuries of frost and thaw, memory becomes more than fragments. It becomes presence, quiet and complete. The heartbeat of the Neanderthal world does not echo in grandeur or conquest, but in the gentle persistence of their mark. A child's tooth buried with ochre, a spear tip worn smooth from years of grip, a cave smoothed by bodies resting through countless winters. These are not relics of extinction. They are remnants of a people who lived deeply within the rhythm of the earth. And though the world turned from their path, folding them into the bloodline and breath of the survivors, the lineage remains unbroken, like a seam in the skin of time. Their story is not over. It never truly ended. It merged, pulse into pulse, silence into song. And as long as we remember to search the wind and listen for the old names carried in shadowed breath, they will remain. Once, we almost split. But even more wondrous, we almost didn't. And in that closeness, that slender margin of near difference, we became something more. In the twilight hush of an ice age forest, where trees groaned beneath the weight of frozen time, two kinds of minds once pondered the same unknowns. They watched the same skies, tracked the same animals, feared the same dark. The wilderness was their scripture, and within it, each species etched a verse. Homo sapiens moved onward, fire kindling their curiosity and belief. The Neanderthals stayed rooted, their fire slow and enduring, burning not with speed, but with depth. And though the winds of fate chose one flame to continue, they chose it not because it burned brighter, but because it swayed more with the storm. The Neanderthals did not fail. They faded, and like any true ancestor, they did not vanish without leaving behind a part of their fire. The trail ends in silence now, but not in emptiness. Only a sacred quiet, where two branches once brushed in the cold and left us forever changed. Beneath strata of clay and crushed limestone, where time compacts memory into silence, evidence of that fragile exchange continues to surface. A finger bone here, bearing the curved robustness of Neanderthal ancestry, but nestled among tools crafted by sapiens' hands. A hearth, blackened by shared fire, yet layered with residues from both diets. Woolly rhino marrow and fish spines too fine for Neanderthal methods alone. Each layer tells a story not of conquest nor erasure, but of contact, intimate, tentative, and profound. Scientists speak in hesitant terms, phrases like introgression and partial admixture, but beneath these words lies something older, more human, a moment where two species, kindred yet cleaved by breath and bone, exchanged more than survival. They shared moments, a glance across a flickering flame, a carved shell passed from one palm to another, a lullaby half remembered, hummed into the cold. These scraps of coexistence stretch time in both directions, reminding us not just of what once was, but of what nearly became. And in that margin, impossibly narrow and indescribably vast, the heart of the story beats on, where extinction and endurance danced across the ice, and the outcome was shaped not by fate alone, but by the fragile courage to meet the other in the dark. At Vindija Cave in the hills of northern Croatia, sediment cores whisper the final chapters of shared existence. Here, amidst crushed grains of ochre and soot-clotted hearthbeds, the boundary between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals blurs into the dust. Genetic samples lifted from bone slivers tell a tale so intricate, its shape can only be measured in echoes and probabilities. One child, her DNA a mosaic of both lineages, suggests not just a brief crossing, but a lived bridge. Her blood, mixed, ancient, whispered, speaks of proximity that spanned more than chance. Perhaps her lullabies were sung with two accents. Perhaps her hands held two kinds of tools, her eyes reflecting both survival instinct and early imagination. The cave keeps her secret, but the earth around her cannot help but murmur. This was not just the ending of one line, but a quiet synthesis. In that hollowness beneath stone, where her bones laid hidden for millennia, we see the tender collision that rewrote the course of all that came after, not in triumph or tragedy, but in a hush, a merging, and the quiet continuation of the flame. Along the southern slopes of the Caucasus, inside a shelter scoured clean by wind and softened by time, archaeologists uncovered a bone, simple in form, unremarkable at first glance. But deeper testing revealed its story. This was the tip of a finger, belonging to a child who bore the signs of both bloodlines, her genes echoing the meeting of Neanderthal endurance and sapiens adaptability. She belonged to neither wholly, and yet to both. Through her, the ancient divergence curved inward once more. Not an anomaly, but a whisper of a broader, hidden pattern. In her bones lived the last sigh of a world where two kinds of human stood at the threshold of full separation, and chose, for a fleeting breath of deep time, not to walk apart. That moment passed, as all moments do, but not without leaving behind its mark. A threshold crossed in silence, an almost species born then folded, a question left pulsing at the center of who we are. Her presence is no legend. It is proof that at the edge of extinction and emergence, we chose, however briefly, to meet, half in shadow, half in starlight, and to touch the future together. So we return, finally, to that firelit plain where our story began. One camp glowing faintly beneath the frozen stars, another mirrored across the ice in the same breath of wind. They were never so far apart, these two kinds of human, not in distance or in dream. Their divergence was like a song sung in two keys, overlapping in moments, fading in others, but always composed of the same longing. They hunted the same beasts, shivered beneath the same northern sky, carved meaning into stone and bone, with hands shaped by the same ancient clay. And though one flame dimmed while the other endured, both once danced in the dark, side by side. This is the story of how we nearly became two. But even more so, it is the story of how we became one. A story etched in ash and breath, in bones buried beneath the wind, and in the quiet, persistent light that still flickers in our dreams. They do not walk among us now, but they are never far. They are the reasons we are not alone in our past, and never truly alone in our becoming. Across the lowlands once gripped by ice, the night breathes with the same cold breath it did 50,000 years ago. Snow presses into the hollows of ancient caves, and trees, older than any written word, creak under the weight of wind and absence. Somewhere in this vast, forgotten theater of survival, the last embers cooled for the last time, and one kind of human stepped away into history, not with thunder or fire, but with quiet. But their trace holds firm. In the moment before sleep, when the hush between thoughts invites something older, we become listeners again, to them, to the near branch of our becoming, the ones who didn't vanish, but waited, folded into the pattern of who we are, the ones who remind us that even now, as we shape stars from machines and tongues from wires, we are not singular. We are the sum of a meeting held in the cold, of a choice made without words. The Neanderthal did not lose. They became something that lives on, buried not in earth, but in us. For every fire we light, every unknown we dare to cross, their shadow steadies our step, a species almost lost, but never truly gone. And in that near parting, in that near joining, humanity found its path. Fragile, flickering, but finally whole in the chill-cracked silence of prehistory's last borderlands, where glacial melt whispered down into plains that would one day feed empires. The echo of two species lingers like smoke in forgotten corridors of time. What remains is not just evidence, but presence. The warm-blooded certainty that humanity once stood upon a threshold of divergence and instead, by fortune or fragility, chose to merge. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to carry forward the fire. Enough to ensure that every cave painting, every whispered myth around a fire, every heartbeat stilled by awe or instinct, bears not one lineage, but two. And so it ends, not with finality, but with communion. The Neanderthal was never fully lost. They watch with us from behind ancient eyes, speak through us in the language of survival, and hold our hand through the dark. We are what walked onward, but we are not alone. We are the future built at the edge of that frozen breath. We are the child of a meeting that never truly ended. And through us, their story continues. Steady as stone, soft as ash, eternal as winter light. And perhaps, in our deepest dreams, there still flickers that ancient memory, not of a world divided, but of one held briefly in delicate balance, somewhere in the soundless corridors of time, where cold carved truth into every hillside and breath crystallized upon waking. The Neanderthal and Homo sapien stood side by side beneath the stars. One left the trail that now marks our path. The other became part of our every step. Not rivals, not remnants, but voices in the same origin song. Their world was not erased. It was woven into the great unfolding of ours. And as the light dims on their chapter, it only begins to rise in our own. In the shivering stillness between separation and unity, we were made. Not by dominance, but by convergence. Not by fate, but by fire. In this, we were forged, not as two, not as one, but as memory made flesh. And that, above all, endures. In the frost-rimed basin of what is now the Dniester Valley, archaeologists uncovered a site unlike others. Shelters layered with hearths spanning generations, suggesting a long and complex presence. One side of the valley bore tools, fashioned in Neanderthal fashion. The other showed the evolving line of Homo sapiens artistry. But in the central strata, a mingling occurred. Bones of both kinds, curled in sleep beside ash-line markings, and carved talismans blending both aesthetic and purpose. This was not conquest or mere cohabitation. It was coexistence with nuance, a blending of survival techniques and worldviews. Among the findings was a flute carved from the hollow bone of a bird. Its holes were drilled in a pattern unlike either species typically used, a hybrid arrangement suggestive of experimentation, of innovation, born not in isolation, but in exchange. Could such music have sung across the firelight between two minds, once divided by divergence? If so, even for just a season, then that melody marks a moment when humanity wrote its future together, note by tentative note, breath drawn from the same shared cold. And still, the wind carries its ancient refrain down that valley, soft, almost imperceptible, but persistent, The soot and stone remember. The buried tools and fragmented flutes speak not just of survival, but of song. A song begun by two voices once set to diverge. In the hush before our dominion, before the myth of singularity took hold, we were many, and we were close. What remains now is not the certainty of what was, but the truth of what almost became, a union forestalled by time, yet glimpsed in every shared breath we unknowingly carry. For though the Neanderthal fire went dark, its warmth has never fully vanished. In dreams that flicker with faces we cannot name, in instincts sharpened by echoes we cannot place, their legacy endures. They're not ghosts, but roots, wound through the soil of our becoming. And when night descends on the quiet places of the world, and we gather once more around flame and story, they return, not in mourning, but in memory, not to haunt, but to remind, that once, long before names and histories, we almost split, but chose instead to kindle together. And the flame still burns, so now, beneath the endless sky that once saw them both walk the earth, we gather their remnants story by story, fragment by fragment, and remember, not out of nostalgia, but out of resonance. For within every human gesture, from the quiet strength that endures hardship to the awe that gazes wordless at stars, some Neanderthal spark still burns. Their world, though ended, was never erased. It pressed into ours, gently but indelibly, a shadow folded into light. What might have been two became one, not perfectly, not fully, but enough to shape the compass of who we became. And so our story is not a tale of loss, but of convergence, and of the miracle that, once upon the frozen edge of time, two fires burned close enough to leave a single flame that still dances in the dark. That flame is us. In the brief hush between extinction and absorption, we find the marrow of this story, not of endings, but of passages. The Neanderthals were not simply a species lost to time, but a kindred fire absorbed into the breath and thought of another. Their bones rest beneath familiar soils, their visions perhaps once inked on walls where our ancestors learned to dream. And within us, their resilience hums. That is their legacy, not just survival failed, but meaning passed on. In every father, teaching his child to read the sky, in every trembling step through fear's shadow, in every still moment when we wonder who we really are. They are there, beneath our need to belong, beneath our instinct to create. What might have been two became one, through neither conquest nor collapse, but convergence. We inherited their silence, their strength, and perhaps even their wonder. And though the winds of history carried their names into the unspoken, the flame never died. It simply moved inward, where it glows still, fragile and eternal, in the deepest places of what it means to be human. For, in the end, it is not the division we remember, but the delicate proximity, the almost, the unfinished braid of story that might have yielded two destinies, yet bent, just barely, toward a single ember's path. And that ember, carried across ages, through ice and hunger and silence, endures as us. We are not merely descendants of Homo sapiens. We are the gentle accumulation of choices made in places like firelit caves and frost-bitten ravines. We are what rose from resilience and reverence alike, our shadows long and mingled. As snow settles now over the hollows where both kinds of human once lit their fires, the earth does not ask who vanished and who remained. It remembers only that, once, in a world gripped by winter and silence, two flames nearly went separate ways, and instead chose to burn together, leaving behind a light that still travels, gleaming softly, into all our tomorrows. And so, as firelight fades one final time on this long-remembered plain, what remains is more than memory. It is inheritance. The Neanderthal did not vanish beneath the crush of ice and time. They were carried forward, quiet and unseen, in the shape of brow and bone, in the tilt of instinct, in the echoing ache for home beneath the stars. Our species walks a path paved not by dominance alone, but by unexpected union, by breath exchanged in silence, by the fragile hope that difference can still become bond. We are not the victors of an ancient rivalry. We are the inheritors of its truce, and in the candlelit spaces of our oldest dreams, the past still speaks, not in words, but in warmth, in the spark passed hand to hand beside the dark, in the haunted hush before daybreak. We were almost two, but we became one, and that story, flickering and flawless in its fragility, still burns, unseen but unforgotten, at the core of all we are, out among the wind-stilled plateaus of forgotten winters, where even the stars seem slower, quieter, and closer to the earth. The echoes of past being do not retreat, but remain steady, lodged in the crevices of time and stone. In these sacred silences, one truth rises beyond all archaeological evidence, beyond DNA strands and soot-stained relics, that humanity was not formed in separation, but in the fragile corridor between losing and becoming. The Neanderthals were not left behind, nor fully absorbed, but joined us in that slow, staggering ascent toward consciousness, not as shadows, nor as ghosts, but as the deepest part of our ancestry, still humming beneath the noise of modern breath. Their footsteps no longer press the dirt, but their weight is in every step. Their gaze, once cast to mammoth herds and frost-shrouded dawns, is echoed now in every skyward glance we make in wonder. What we are is not despite them, but because of them. Carried within us is not just the record of their extinction, but the quiet miracle of their endurance. For we are not merely the flame that remains. We are the fire they helped kindle, and the story they began, still unfolding inside us all. In the end, it was not the strongest nor the swiftest who wrote the final line of that ancient chapter, but those whose hearts held both remembrance and reinvention. As blizzards gathered and faded across forgotten steppes, the story of the Neanderthals folded into sinew and song, becoming the unspoken rhythm beneath our laughter, our grief, our dreams beneath cold skies. We did not replace them. We continued them, and though their names are lost to the ice, their presence remains, alive in our instincts, vibrant in the stillness before sleep, present in our strange urge to look back, even as we move forward. This is the legacy of nearness, of the almost split that became unity. A story silently carried across 50,000 winters, until finally, in the warmth of firelight and memory, we understand. Not all that fades is gone, and not all that merges is erased. We are the ember that endures, sheltered still by the ones who came before. And as long as breath warms the dark, and stories find tongues to carry them, that ember burns on, quiet, eternal, and indivisibly shared. Even here, at the closing edge of this vast and ancient tale, the soil exhales its secrets with humility, a fragment of jaw, a scrap of stone etched on both sides, a layer of soot mingled with pollen from two far-hung regions brought together by the wanderings of unremembered feet. Each discovery is a whisper, a thread connecting now to then, reminding us that the roots of our existence are tangled with a life that once burned beside our own, not inferior, not lost, but folded into our becoming. The Neanderthals may not have built empires or penned their thoughts, but their hands shaped the same earth. Their eyes lifted to the same constellations. And though their voices are gone, the harmony they helped compose still lingers in the rhythm of who we are. Our shared flame has traveled through uncounted winters, igniting not dominion, but understanding. To tell their story is not to mourn their ending, it is to honor the fire they lit within us. And as long as we breathe beneath the stars, they too once watched. They are not extinguished. They are part of the light that guides us still. Thus, the lamps of the past do not fade in final darkness, but instead flare in unexpected places. In the pulse beneath our skin, in our reflexes sharpened by echoes we do not name, in our quiet awe when flame meets shadow. The Neanderthals, once poised to become a separate people entirely, were not erased, nor were they fully absorbed. They joined a lineage that continued on, one beat stronger because it held more than its own rhythm. We took their patience, their strength, their stillness. We became, in part, what they had been. And now, as we look back through time's frozen mirrors, tracing our roots not to triumph but to togetherness, we see not the silence of one who vanished, but the legacy of one who remained in us. Now, the story closes, not on a threshold of division, but on the quiet unity forged long ago in the cold by two kinds of people, warming side by side by the same flickering fire. And in that fire, warming two shadows once poised apart, humanity was remade, not as a single story triumphant over another, but as a layered silence made whole by memory, by resilience, by a quiet entwining. What the Neanderthals gave us was not failure, but a form of completion, an inheritance of tenacity and grace, folded into the marrow of our becoming. Their chapter does not close with fading footsteps, but with a presence reverberating through every instinct, every sacred moment. We feel the past rise inside us and do not know why. We are the song they never had time to finish, the line they began and we continued. This is no ending, only a return to the breathless cold where two species once became kin, to the firelight that outlived both names, and to the truth that in nearly dividing, we chose to hold fast, to burn on, together, beneath the unsleeping stars. So let that final firelight not dim in silence, but be borne forward in every heartbeat that remembers. What once trembled on the edge of separation became, instead, a shared ember passed between the hands of two kinds of human who met in the cold and saw each other not as other, but as echo. The Neanderthals do not vanish with our forgetting. They revive with our remembrance. In every story told beneath a night sky, in every step taken across ancient land, in every moment where instinct rises unbidden from the deep well of who we are, they stir, not as ghosts, but as kin. We were nearly two. We became one. And it is that fragile wonder, that sacred closeness, that survived, not alone, not unchanged, but together, carrying not just the flame, but the memory of every hand that ever reached for it. So, as the dusk falls over that ancient world one final time, the wind sighing through pine and across stone-packed ground, we listen, not for an ending, but for a homecoming. What might have been two separate fires never fully flared apart. They leaned to one another, flickering together for just long enough to leave us marked by both. And now, as the last echoes of their presence merge with the soft hush of our own breath, it becomes clear. The story of Neanderthal and Homo sapien is not about a path not taken, but about one joined upon a narrow edge where difference bowed to shared being. They taught us the shape of endurance, and we carried it forward in flame. They knelt with us beside hunted prey, carved tools that shaped gods from stone, and looked with us into the dark for meaning. To walk as human is to walk with their echo underfoot, to carry their silence as shelter. We are not the survivors alone. We are the inheritors of a song sung by two voices, once almost divided, now indivisible. And in the stillness where memory and myth entwine, the flame between us burns on. And now, beneath the vast sky where frost once ruled and silence reigned, comes the closing breath of a story aged in ice and fire. The Neanderthals did not leave behind empires cast in a marble or myths etched in gold, but they left something greater, an inflection in the voice of our species, a divergence that almost was, a heartbeat we still feel beneath our skin. Their fire did not extinguish. It was folded gently into ours. Their footsteps no longer break the snow, but they echo in the corridors of memory and instinct. So here, at the quiet end of that long and winding path, we bury not a species, but a song, unfinished yet enduring. It sings in us still, in every choice to cherish, to remember, to survive. This is where the telling ends, not with sorrow, but with awe. For we stand not merely as Homo sapiens, but as the living testament of two flames that met in the cold and, for a shining moment, burned as one. The final spark does not fade. It glows on, tender and endless, in the sheltering dark of who we are. So, let the night draw its veil across that ancient sky. Let the stars gleam undisturbed above the once shared paths of ice and instinct. The Neanderthals are no longer with us in form, yet they remain as rhythm, as pulse, as memory ingrained into the silence between words. We do not walk alone into the future. We carry them in the bones of our stories, in the furrows of our thoughts, in the warmth of every fire we gather around. Their legacy is not a chapter concluded, but an undercurrent flowing, still, unseen, but ever near. As the last echoes fade from the frozen valleys and ancestral fires fall quiet, one truth endures above all. We are not merely the survivors of the Great Divide, we are its crossing. And in every breath that stirs within us now, they rise, steady and silent, reminding the world that what almost parted, instead, dared to remain. Let this be where the trail narrows into memory, and the breath of ancient ones blends finely into our own. In this final hush, where story and time intertwine, the Neanderthals take their place, not behind us, but within us. What could have shattered instead sustained. What could have divided instead joined. And as we walk our futures across landscapes they once knew, we carry not only our own legacy, but theirs. The flicker of fire against stone, the echo of a voice in a darkened cave, the wisdom in a gaze cast toward stars, all are theirs and ours together. This is the testament not of a vanished people, but of a union too fragile to hold, yet strong enough to shape everything after. So as we return to our own fires, may we remember theirs, not as separate, but as one, not as lost, but as lasting. And in that memory, kept warm in the marrow of our being, the story lives on, whole, wondrous, and forever burning in the dark. And there, where the winds fade into stillness and the shadows soften over the stone cradle of prehistory, the story draws to its quiet end, not as a fading tale, but as a testament to resilience and union. The Neanderthals, once poised to walk a different path, remain not in bone alone, but in every stirring of our deeper knowing. Their legacy is companionship woven into the most human of things, wonder, recognition, and the fire that binds us. Across frozen rivers and sunlit plains, their presence hums, in the silence of what almost was, in the warmth of what became. Two branches, once twisted apart by nature's hand, came close enough to touch, close enough to leave behind not a fracture, but a flame that never died. And though the world has turned and changed beyond their imagining, we are still, in part, their memory walking forward, still carrying the flame, still breathing the echo, still listening in the dark for the sound of who we were and who we chose to become. It ends here, not in separation, but in one final breath, shared across time, where the story of almost splits into the story of becoming whole. So let this last echo settle, not as an end, but as a low heartbeat carried forward through time's long corridor. The Neanderthals, once tethered to a different dawn, remain, subtle as breath against stone, weightless as starlight on an old trail. What we almost became was not lost, only folded into the weave of our becoming. Beneath every instinct lies the residue of shared firelight, of choices made in the hush between fear and familiarity. They are there in our grip, in our silence, in the primal ache to endure. And as the cold wind curls once more through the high passes of time, we understand their story is not one of erasure, but of merging, a tender entropy where separation softened and something eternal was born in its place. The fire still flickers, the shadows flicker too, and in that unbroken interplay lies the truth that we are not alone in our origin, that we are, forever, a blended flame, set burning by a meeting in the dark, and carried forward by the memory of those who nearly walked another way. And now, as the last words fall like snow across this long and silent chronicle, we return once more to that shared fire, that miracle of nearness beneath a frozen sky. The Neanderthals, with their deep eyes and earthbound rhythms, and the Homo sapiens, with minds kindled by imagining, met not by accident, but by gravity, drawn together by the flame that all beings crave when darkness gathers. They stood not just at the edge of a glacial world, but at the threshold between division and unity. And from that meeting rose something neither species foresaw: us. We are the inheritance of their closeness, the breath between their parting and their merging. This is not merely history past, it is life remembered. The trail ends not in forgetting, but in the quiet knowing that the story of Homo sapiens is not complete without the Neanderthal echo beating softly beneath it. We carry them still, in warmth, in silence, in fire. A flame once shared, now wholly ours and never alone. So, let this be the final ember, the quiet flicker that outlasts even the telling. In caves embraced by ice and across plains erased by time, the story left behind is not of two species parted, but of two fires drawn close enough to warm the future. The Neanderthals were not swept away. They became threads in the greater tapestry, a breath folded into our own. In the pounding silence that walks with us through every forest, in the pause before every question too ancient for words, their essence stirs. They are not behind us. They are within us. Through their endurance, we learned patience. Through their flame, we learned kinship. And through their fading, we learned that survival is not conquest, but connection. So, walk gently now, across the world their footprints once touched. Hear them in the hush between stars. Feel them in the stillness of ancient winds. For what was nearly lost was never truly gone. It is the ember in our marrow, the shadow that strengthens our light, and it burns still, forever shared, forever one. So, let the embers rest now, soft in the hollows of memory, untouched by the urgency of forgetting. The Neanderthals walk no longer, not through snow nor silence, but their path is not unmarked. It lives within the layered breath of our becoming, in the marrow-deep ache of connection that reaches backward toward that glacial dusk. The story that once teetered on the edge of splitting has instead folded into continuity, a rare inheritance carved not from conquest, but from kinship. And as the dark falls once more over the ancient places, the last beat lingers, steady as the stars they once watched. We are not just what endured. We are what remembered, what almost divided, but did not. A single flame born of two, one light still burning. So, as we step away from this long-burning fire, leaving behind frost-bitten valleys and soot-darkened caves, the final glow remains not in place, but in presence. We walk forward, cradling a memory too old for names, yet too near to ignore. The Neanderthals did not vanish as shadows do. They became the light we carry, refracted across time, across blood, across silence. What might have been a separation became a thread, the bruised, beautiful filament that binds all human paths together. And with every footstep we take in lands once shaped by their hands, we honor the truth written not in triumph, but in nearness. One fire, one breath, one story, flickering still, undivided, unforgotten, across the deepening snowfields of memory, as the ancient winds recede and the hush before dawn takes hold, we carry something older than ourselves, a shared inheritance, not written in words, but in the continuity of warmth and will. The Neanderthals, carved by cold and silence, and the Homo sapiens, stirred by vision and fire, did not part as strangers, nor merge as conqueror and conquered. They met, however briefly, in the fragile middle, where breath meets breath, and silence becomes story. In that ancient pact, unspoken yet enduring, we were shaped not by division, but by fusion. So let this be the ember left in the ashes, not of a people lost, but of a people remembered. One final flicker in the long night, lighting the path, not of one lineage, but of all that became human. And in the still place where their fire met ours, something lasting began. A song composed by two voices, whispered once in the cold, and now still heard, faintly, but forever. In the flame, we keep alive. So now, let the light fade gently from the ancient plain, its stones still warm from the fire that once welcomed two kinds of human under one sky. Let the final snow settle over the footprint whose shape we can no longer name. The Neanderthals are no longer ours to separate or define. They are part of the shape that our kind became. in every breath that steadies us in the cold, in every story that rises without beginning or end. They remain. Their chapter closes not in loss, but in the unbroken joining of flame and form. We were nearly two, but in the hush of glacial twilight, we found each other. And from that meeting was born something enduring, something indivisible, not Homo sapiens alone, but humanity in full. And that above all is the story that still burns behind every shadow, in the long stillness of our becoming. So this is where we leave them, not in sorrow, but in awe, on that ancestral plane where one kind of human faded and another emerged, carrying more than just their story forward. In the cold hush of deep time, the Neanderthal fire danced briefly beside our own, not extinguished, but passed hand to hand, flame to flame, heart to heart. And as their footprints disappear beneath falling snow, their presence does not vanish. It lingers, a warmth in our blood, a shadow in our instinct, a whisper in the stories we tell around every fire still lit against the dark. They were never outside us, never fully other. They are the echo we all carry, the near-divided path that chose instead to fold inwards. And now, as silence closes gently over the last echoing breath of this tale, what remains is not a world lost, but one forever altered by unity, forged in winter's breath. We almost split, but we didn't, and that, more than anything, is the fire we still carry forward into the dark. And in this closing hush, where time folds in upon itself like snow upon the embers of what was, we find not silence, but presence. The Neanderthal story, once thought a fading trail under ice, proves to be a through line woven deeply into our pulse, our fire, our gaze skyward when words fail. We are not only Homo sapiens, we are the sum of an ancient embrace, a flame once sustained by two kinds of human hearts. This tale, carved in the marrow of mountains and sung in the breath before sleep, does not weep for what was lost. It honors what remained. We are what came after, yes, but forever marked by who came before. And as we step from the last flicker of their world into the soft dark of our own becoming, we carry the shared ember forward. Not a relic, a promise that even in the coldest moment of history, kinship can prevail, and that unity, brief and brave, may yet be the oldest firelight that guides us still. So, as the last warmth ebbs from that ancient fire, and the wind sighs across the pale bones of a vanished moment, we remember not a people extinguished, but a kinship held aloft in the deep quiet of becoming. The Neanderthals are no longer a mystery buried in strata and shadow. They are the breath behind ours, the stillness in our search for meaning, and the grace in our resilience. Their gift was never conquest, never monument. It was endurance entwined with gentleness, strength braided with silence. And in that passing, that folding inward into our lineage, they became not footnote, but foundation. We walk forward now, carrying their fire woven with our own, forged not in victory, but in union. The frost has long melted, the maps have changed, but the path, shared once, walked briefly together, still glows, faint and eternal beneath each step. We were almost two. We became one. And through that fragile, evanescent closeness we remain, lit not only by the sun, but by the flicker of a fire that will never die. Let this, then, be the final breath in a story born of frost, fire, and the fragile edge of becoming. The Neanderthals, once seen as a lineage that ended, live on, not as relic or regret, but as resonance. Their hands steadied the tools that shaped our valleys. Their silence taught us to listen between storms, and their endurance became part of the rhythm that pulses still within our steps. They did not merely pass away, they passed into us, into the curled instinct to survive, into the flicker of awe beneath ancient skies, into the memory we cannot name, but carry all the same. And as the last light fades across that timeless plain where they once stood beside us, not separate, but near, what remains is not absence at all, but the ember of what we share. In that ember rests the story, not broken, not lost, but whole. We almost became two. Instead, we became one, and through that oneness, shaped in a time before speech, but felt still in every heartbeat, the fire they helped kindle burns quietly, endlessly, within us all. So, as the snow settles softly once more over the ancient world, blanketing the remnants of a meeting written in warmth rather than war, this is how we remember, not in the records of kingdoms, but in the hush of breath drawn together. Long ago, in the dark, the Neanderthals did not fade because they failed. They faded because they gave something of themselves to the story that survived, and in doing so, they transcended extinction. Their fire joins ours, quietly eternal. Their silence lives in our stillness. Their strength carries in our endurance. And though their path turned inward and ended beneath the hush of forgotten ice, the trail they walked lives on beneath our feet. We are not heirs to their absence. We are vessels of their flame. The story closes now, not by dimming, but by deepening. Beneath our skin, above our fires, between our words, they remain. This is how humanity began, not as one, not as two, but as a choice made long ago to share a fire in the cold and to walk forward, not alone, but forever changed by that closeness. So now, let the last breath of their story settle where frost once met fire, and two shadows danced along the same stone walls. This was never a tale of conquest. It was a quiet crossing, a near divergence held together by the fragile instincts that led two kinds of human to warmth, to wonder, to each other. And though the Neanderthal fire has long dipped below the horizon, it still flickers in us, in how we endure, in how we remember, and in how we reach, even now, for echoes carved in the bones of time. We do not walk forward as a single thread. We carry them stitched into the fabric of our story, vivid not in monuments, but in marrow, in the hush before sleep, in the ancient pull to face the unknown with fire in hand. This is what remains, not extinction, but entwining, not loss, but lineage. The fire they lit beside us did not die. It became the light by which we still find our way home. So let the flame rest now, quiet but alive, in the deepest places of who we are. In the silence between what was and what remained, the Neanderthals gave us more than memory. They gave us measure, of strength and slowness, of connection and solitude, of a path nearly taken and a future barely avoided. They did not step aside. They stepped through us, and in doing so, shaped not just our form, but our fire. Their world has long turned to dust and echo, yet it breathes still through us, in reflex, in wonder, in shadow. One species endured, but not alone. We walk forward with their endurance in our bones, their wondering in our eyes, and their vanished breath rising in every story we still dare to tell. The ice has melted, the footprints have faded, but beneath it all, the ember remains, not behind us, not gone, but glowing, forever, at the quiet heart of what it means to be human. So, let the fire burn down now, not as an end, but as a vow, a warmth remembered, not lost. The Neanderthal story was never merely about what ceased, but about what continued in quieter form, through bloodlines, through instinct, through the long memory of the earth itself. Beneath every cold sky, in every pause between heartbeat and breath, something of them lingers, not as a shadow, but as substance. Their hands shaped the same stones we now walk upon. Their eyes, once lifted toward the same stars we still seek, remind us that origin is not ownership, and survival is not solitude. We are who we are because they were. And long after names fade and voices fall silent, their truth endures in us, not as a relic, but as a rhythm. One that began beside a flickering fire in a frozen world, and still pulses now in the warmth we carry home. So, let the fire burn down now, not into darkness, but into memory. For it is there, in that gentle twilight between what was and what remains, that the Neanderthals endure, not as a closed chapter, but as a heartbeat echoing within our own. Theirs is not a story of extinction, but of transformation, of a lineage that chose, without words, to become something shared. And so, our breath carries theirs, our gaze folds theirs into every horizon we meet. This is the enduring flame, that what nearly divided instead bound us tighter than bone. That in frost and silence, two kinds of human reached across the divide, not with war, but with presence. And now, as the long telling draws to stillness, the flame's glow rests not just in history, but in us, carried always, quiet, whole, and endlessly alight. And so, the telling ends, not in finality, but in flame. What the Neanderthals gave us was not theirs alone to keep, but ours now to carry. In every shadowed forest and every snow-softened hill, their presence endures, not as a people apart, but as the quiet heartbeat beneath our becoming. They were not lost. They were woven into dream, into instinct, into the stillness we feel when we pause beside firelight and remember the long dark from which we came. We are the sum of that nearness, that almost split, turned, shared breath. This story, born of frost and closeness, now enters silence again, not forgotten, but glowing still, deep within us, where memory becomes warmth, and warmth becomes the human flame. So let it close here, gently, like snow settling over footprints too old to trace, yet too deep to forget. The Neanderthal and Homo sapien journey did not end with a fracture, but with a fold, a shared ember beating quietly through every age that followed. In the wide silence they left behind, we hear their echo best, woven into bone, remembered in firelight, echoed in the stillness of ancient dreams. We did not walk away from them. We walked with them until the path narrowed, until one fire dimmed and another carried on, bearing not just its own light, but the warmth of both. And so this story, vast and delicate, does not vanish into the dark. It continues as legacy, as rhythm, as union etched into the deepest marrow of what it means to be human. One fire remains, and in that enduring flame, they are never gone. Only remembered, only near, only us. Let this final ember linger not as epilogue, but as tribute. A warmth passed from hand to hand across the ages, shaped by two hearts that once beat beneath different bones. The Neanderthals are no longer a question of survival or science. They are part of who we became when survival demanded more than strength. It required closeness, curiosity, and kinship. That two kinds of human faced the void and found kin in each other is not just remarkable, it is sacred. Their memory is not a relic entombed in cave dust, but a living thread of consciousness, echoing with every instinctual hush before storm, every dream where voices call us back to fireglow and frost. This union, once fragile as flame and wind, became the cradle of our human story. We are the children of that fire, the breath that remained when silence fell. And as long as flame flickers in bone and memory stirs beneath ancient stars, we carry them forward, not alone, not divided, but as one enduring light, flickering still against the dark. Let this final spark be not a farewell, but a vow that what once nearly slipped into silence instead found permanence in us. The Neanderthals, whose journey bent toward shadow but never broke from the light, gave us more than their tools or traits. They gave us the shape of resilience refined by time, the gravity of kinship in the face of cold, and a lineage that beats still beneath our ribs. Their end was not disappearance, but deepening, into myth, into marrow, into the shared fire at the root of what we are. And now, as the last words return to quiet and the snow closes gently over the story's path, we do not say goodbye. We breathe in their presence, steady and warm. One fire, two souls, one enduring journey. This is where the tale concludes, not with loss, but with light. Ever near, ever within, ever burning. In the silence that follows the telling, as fire sinks to ember and wind hushes its voice across the age-worn plain, we are left with more than story. We are left with belonging. The Neanderthals have not faded from us. They remain woven into every dusk where silence feels sacred, every moment where instinct wraps around thought like fur against skin. Their journey did not diverge. It deepened into us. Beneath the hum of every breath, their rhythm stirs, ancient and unwavering. And as we stand now at the trembling doorway of tomorrow, with stars overhead unchanged for 50,000 years, we carry the light of that ancient flame, not as echo, not as ghost, but as kin. This is how it ends, and how it always continues. One fire, one breath, shared, eternal, and whole. So let the voice of this remembering settle now into quiet, like the last curl of smoke dimming into stillness above a long-burned hearth. The story of when humans almost split into two is not one of rupture, but of resonance, a fragile nearness that swayed but did not break. And that resonance lives on not in monument or myth, but in us, in the gaze that yearns, in the silence that listens, in the breath that shelters fire. We are the inheritors not of mere survival, but of an ancient nearness turned unspoken bond. In every moment when our instincts reach backward through time for hands we cannot name, we draw close again to that shared becoming. And so we walk forward, not alone, not separate, but whole, with a fire kindled by two, carried by one, and still burning beneath a sky where both once stood together and looked up in wonder. This is where the path fades, but the ember remains. So, let us leave that sacred crossroad of becoming not as a place forgotten, but as the moment that made all else possible. In that cold silence where two species once stood beside the same fire, the human story found its rarest path, not of separation, but of synthesis. The Neanderthal flame, steady and enduring, met the spark of Homo sapiens' curiosity, and together they lit something that would outlast the ice. Every step forward since then carries both the weight and the wonder of that meeting. They are not just our past, they are the foundation beneath our stride, the low hum beneath our song. Their absence is not a void, but a presence folded so deeply into our essence that every breath we take is also theirs. The story ends not in vanishing, but in communion. And that one ancient fire, kindled together beneath a frost-choked sky, still burns, low, luminous, and eternal, within us all. So let this, then, be the final turning. A story not carved in stone or sung to kings, but written quietly in the warm marrow of our survival. The Neanderthals do not vanish in this ending. They become the closing chord in a song begun before memory, sustained in dream and fire. We are not their witnesses, but their continuation. In every instinct that steadies us in the cold, in every trembling kindness offered without reason, they live unspoken, unwritten, yet enduring. We did not conquer them. We became more through them. And now, as the last echoes fall still in that long corridor between ice and flame, we carry not just a legacy, but a light, shared, whole, undivided. And as that flame glows low, folded into the soul of all we are, one truth remains. We are not merely the ones who remained. We are the ones who remember. And so, the fire burns on. So now, beneath this fading sky of long memory and frostless dusk, the story rests as ember and inheritance. The Neanderthals, once our neighboring flame beneath the Ice Age stars, did not vanish cleanly, nor wholly ever leave. They remain in the soil we cross in silence, in the shadows that ripple through our oldest stories, in some silent part of us that still turns to fire and listens. What we nearly became, a lineage diverged, instead became a lineage deepened. And as this tale winds, shut beneath the hush of snow long melted, we see it clearly. The miracle was not that we survived, but that we did so together, if only for a breath of deep time. They are not gone, not truly. They are the quiet in our marrow, the wind behind the flame. And wherever we walk from here, we carry not just their memory, but their fire, still alight, still ours, still one. So let it stand, this legacy born of frost and fire, etched not in triumph, but in shared breath. The Neanderthals have walked their path into us, not as a people eclipsed, but as voices threaded into the marrow of our becoming. Their fire, kindled in glacial dusk, glows on in every instinct that draws us to warmth, in every silence that makes space for remembering. No monument remains, yet their tribute is written in us, in the way we search the horizon, in the quiet awe that stirs at ancient flame. As we step beyond the edge of this telling, we carry them still, not as a chapter closed, but as a rhythm endured. It ends here, where all endings bend back into beginnings, with one breath, one fire, and one story, endlessly, indivisibly human. And so, as the story finds its final shelter in the marrow of memory, what lingers is not the ache of what was lost, but the sacred weight of what became us. Beneath all the timelines and tools, all the ash and echo, lives a single enduring truth, that two species once stood in the stillness of pre-dawn frost, and for a fleeting breath in deep time, chose proximity over parting. The Neanderthals did not crumble into silence. They stepped into the story we would carry, line by line, breath by breath. And even now, when the world feels far from the cold clarity of that ancient dawn, we kneel unconsciously before their fire in every moment of survival, of wonder, of search. This is the legacy they left, not as separate, but as shared. Not as cinders scattered, but as warmth passed onward. And though snow has long buried their footprints and stars have shifted slightly in their sky, something of them endures, quiet as a heartbeat, steady as a flame, inside the story that is still unfolding, still human, and still one. So let that ember be the last word, a glow that time has not undone. The Neanderthals, whose breath once rose beside ours in caves wrapped in silence, gave more than bones to the world. They gave testament to what humanity can become when difference meets not fear, but fire. This story ends not in separation, but in folded light, in lineage shared and whispered on through the long cold. We are what remains, yes, but more than that, we are what became. And in every step we take beneath a sky, they also knew, in every story told in the hush before sleep, we carry the closeness that made all else possible. One fire, one past, and in its warmth, nothing is lost, only remembered, only near, only us. And now, let the flame rest, steady, unbroken, and eternal. The final breath of this tale carries no mourning, only reverence. For in their quiet fading, the Neanderthals gave us not a void to fill, but a thread to follow. Through wind-swept time and the hush of forgotten winters, their presence trails beside our own, not in shadow, but in stride. They were not left behind. They walk within. Theirs was a memory not erased, but etched in every hearth we kindle, every wilderness we cross, every silence we honor without knowing why. This is not goodbye. It is the gentle closing of a circle drawn long before language. Theirs was the fire beside ours, the gaze that once met ours across the dawn. And though their voices are gone, the warmth remains, alive in us, in all we have become, and all we still might be. So let the flame sleep now, woven into the quiet breath of ancestral wind, its glow dulled not by time, but by tenderness. The Neanderthals, once poised to become something wholly apart, instead sank roots into the shared soil of our survival. Their courage is not written loud. It is etched in the way we endure, the way we dream. And as this last ember softens into the silence from which it rose, we do not close their chapter. We carry it forward, folded into the warmth of every fire we still light against the dark. Two paths once stood upon the frozen edge. One lingered, then faded. The other stepped onward. But the flame between them, that miracle of nearness, burns still, invisible yet vast, reminding us always that we are made not only of what survived, but of all we never truly left behind. And thus, in that deep and final hush where beginnings kissed their own reflections, the story of two nearly divided species settles not into silence, but into continuation. The Neanderthals were not a fleeting detour, nor a fading echo. They were a parallel breath in humanity's becoming, folded gently into our own. Their fire, kindled against winds long gone, still warms the underside of our shared existence. In every quiet moment where instinct guides our hands, where we seek meaning beneath the stars or warmth within each other's presence, they remain. This is the gift they left us, not just in fragments of bone or DNA, but in bearings shared with grace. So if this tale ends, let it do so with gratitude. For from the coldest edge of prehistory, a bond was forged. And in that bond, we found not only survival, but the shape of who we would become. One fire, one story, one enduring light carried forward, forever, by the breath of two now made one. So let the story rest now, not in silence, but in the kindling hush that follows the telling. The Neanderthals, once poised on their own branch of evolution, did not vanish unmarked. They became the unseen roots that steadied our rise. In firelight, we remember them. In stillness, we feel them. Their strength bolsters our endurance. Their quiet bonds echo in the families we form, the empathy we share. What was nearly two became one, not through conquest, but through convergence, through a fire shared beneath the ice. As we turn from that ancient hearth and step again into the dark, we carry their presence in every breath, every heartbeat, every dream shaped by the memory of a world where human paths once shimmered side by side. That memory, now folded into the soul of who we are, remains unextinguished, guiding, warming, and whispering through the dark. We were almost two, but we became one, and in that becoming, the fire survives.